Once you have mixed your crystal clay and placed it inside of your bezels, you can also add another little step and add a little bit of gilding flakes. So let me show you how to add the gilding flakes to the wet crystal clay, and let me show you how you can also make fun little balls like this in the open back bezels and apply a little bit of gilding flakes onto these as well. To clean the findings, you're going to want to have a little bit of rubbing alcohol and some Q-tips and a couple of wet wipes. So starting with this one here, I'll go ahead and dip my Q-tip right inside of the rubbing alcohol so it's nice and wet. And then just place it down inside. You can see I'm just kind of getting that whole base of the finding nice and wet with the rubbing alcohol, and you can see that it comes off very easily. So I'm placing a little bit of rubbing alcohol in the base around these edges here, and up here is where it tends to gather that oxidization. Then with a wet wipe, just go ahead and wipe down any of that oxidization from especially this lip area, especially when we're working with the resin, because we pull it over onto that lip area and down into the base of the bezel. I'm going around this side edge, and this is about as thorough as you'll need to be, because if it's not lifting up now, you should be good to go. So go ahead and clean all of the various bezels that you would like to use, and we will move on to the next step. Next, we're going to use a little bit of this crystal clay in the black to mix it, and then we're going to embed it into the various bezels. Depending on which one you purchase, you're going to want to open up the package, and you will see inside of here there are some gloves. There's some packages of crystal clay, the part A and part B, and it also has a toothpick with a little applicator, and this is when you want to embed crystals into the piece, so we won't be using that, so you can save that for later. Go ahead and open up your gloves. And you can open up the 2 packages of crystal clay. So part A is always going to be the color that you're working with. This one's black. And part B is going to be the resin itself. When these 2 pieces, or these 2 A and B, are activated, that's what makes it rock hard after it's had its full time to cure. It has to be a 1-to-1 ratio. It doesn't need to be exact like resin. It can just be approximate. If you want to, you can weigh it out with a scale, but I just kind of pinch off equal sized balls. I also like to work with placing down onto my work surface like a little piece of plastic, so that when I get these out of the package, I have them onto a surface so it doesn't stick onto my paper surface. Before I start to work with these, I'm going to go ahead and put on my gloves. To work with the gloves, I like to always have a little bit of baby powder on my hands thoroughly before I insert them in the gloves. That's what makes these gloves super easy to get on and off, and I can just use these over and over again. I'm also going to want to have a couple of handy wipes so that I can wipe my hands down easily after I work with the clay. I'm going to put a piece of paper down onto my work surface as I get my hands nice and coated with the baby powder. sometimes there's moisture or my hands can get sweaty while I'm in the gloves, so it's nice to have them pre-done. This is what makes it easy for my hands to come in and out between usages. Now that my hands are protected from the clay, I can go ahead and pinch off 2 equal sized balls. This is going to be a matter of trial and error to figure out exactly the quantity that you'll need for the various bezels. But if we're doing a bezel, let's say like this, over time you'll figure out exactly what kind of quantity you will need to do to fill this up. But my recommendation is while you're still learning and before you actually get into production, that you just pinch off not enough, because it's so much easier just to go back and create or make more clay than it is for you to have to hurry up and use all of the clay. So pull off about a large blueberry size ball of A and a large blueberry size ball of B. And see like how equal are those in size. And I can just see that my B is a little bit more than it needs to, so I can put back a little bit. And as you start to get more and more fluent in doing this, you can weigh it, you'll know exactly how much it takes to go inside of there, so you might mix up 20 balls worth and then do 20 pendants worth. But that's what you're going to want to do, is pinch off equal sized balls from part A and from part B. Then before you go any farther, you're going to want to set these aside. We're going to close these up and package them in just a little bit. Pick up your part A and part B and blend this together fully. So there's different types of gloves. These are the gloves that come inside of the package of the crystal clay. These are actually really big for my hands, and so it's harder for me to mix these. So not all gloves are the same, and you might want to look into getting some gloves that are a little bit better sized. I have very small hands, and so these gloves are big, and so it makes it a little bit more challenging to work with the clay. But it's just when the clay is in that loose form of part A and B. The B is where the epoxy is, and so it's just not a good idea to touch that with your hands, because you could touch your eyes or whatever. So I always put the gloves on, or try to put the gloves on prior to working with this when it's in that raw state. And then once it's mixed together and it's activated, you can take the gloves off. Alright, so the clay is no longer marbled, it's pretty consistent, and so just go ahead and put that on your work surface. This is where I do like to use the wet wipe and rub all of that excess clay. Mostly I'm getting the colorant, because the black, they have to put so much ink in there to get it that nice strong black, and that's what's coming off on my gloves mostly, is just that ink color. So you can just wipe your gloves down with a wet wipe, and so they're nice and clean. And then you just go ahead and pull on the fingers, and with that baby powder underneath, it makes it really easy for these gloves to come off and not turn inside out, and then you can just reuse the gloves over and over again. When you're finished with the crystal clay, you can go ahead and close up the package and seal it as tight as you can, removing any of the excess air. The crystal clay comes in a little package like this, but when I'm restoring it, I like to put part A in one bag, closing that up and just squeezing out the air, and then the part B, I like to seal up and keep in a separate bag. And this is just to help prevent it from hardening a little bit sooner than it needs to. So I keep the A inside here, and then the B is completely in its own bag. So there's not any risk whatsoever of these two getting activated. So I'm going to put the two in, pull out any excess air, and seal it up. Now that the clay is activated, we can start to put it into the various bezels that we want to use it in. And let me show you how to do that. Before I touch that clay too much, I still have some baby powder on my hands. So using a wet wipe, just wipe off that baby powder. If the clay is really, really sticky when you first start to work with it, you can just let it sit 10 minutes, and with time this will start to firm up a little bit and it won't be nearly as sticky. So you can see it's not terribly sticky right now, but it is, if yours was super wet, often if you're colorizing this clay with like a white clay and you're adding some of the opaque pigments to it, there's other tutorials teaching you how you can colorize your own clay. You want to let it sit for, I don't know, up to 20 minutes. Sometimes it's just oversaturated with the colorants, and as it sets up, it's much easier to work with. So I'm going to start with filling this bezel first. I'm going to have some fresh wet wipes ready for me to go, because I'm going to want to mix the clay into a nice round ball and then place it into the bezel. So I'm looking for a nice round ball without a lot of creases in it. And let's start with this bezel first. So the trick to this, and this is what I often see, is people will have a really big ball and they'll place it in and they just start to squish it down. And that's when it starts to get all over the sides and you just have a lot more cleanup to do. So what I recommend is that you make it into a nice round ball. In each of the different bezels, I have different techniques for applying the clay in it. Just over time, I've just learned faster ways. Like if it was a circle, it has one way, but an oval like this, let me show you. I'll start at the top right here, and if you saw, I made a round ball, but then I kind of made it a little bit elongated, and I will start at the top right up here, and I'm just kind of bringing it up into that top area and pressing down with my thumb, and then I'm going to pull it and push it down towards the other end of the bezel. If I start to pull a little bit too much, I can come back up here, but I'm coming down. And if I get to the end and I have like a lot, it depends on the look I want. I'm wanting this to be nice and flush. If I wanted it to be domed, I could do it differently, but right now I'm just wanting it to be flush. So if I get down to this end and I have like a big ball down here, I can easily pinch off some of that excess clay and then continue on. That's one way that I have found that makes it a lot easier to apply the clay in to the bezel without having a lot of cleanup on these edges, and I can have a nice clean look. So now I'm just going in and seeing if I have any gaps along the edges, like right here. You can see I have a little gap or uneven, so I can use my fingers to go in and press the clay up into that area. And that's where we let off the last time. You see that little gap down there? I can go in with my thumb and press that clay down into there. So if you have a lot of fingerprints, or I'm just going in with my thumb and just kind of tapping rapidly to make that nice and flat and flush. But if you do have a lot of fingerprints on there, or if it's not nice and smooth, you can take a wet wipe and just smooth the clay. Do you see how that white, that moisture is just making that nice smooth surface. Then you can go more around on these outside edges and just wipe any of that clay away, because it will harden like cement and then it'll be on that side edge. So you can get the idea of how we did that one. Next, let's try one of these bezels that has more of a pointy edge like this. So I can show you how you go about doing that. All right, so I'm going to pinch off a little ball worth, roll that into a nice smooth ball. So I'm looking for a ball that doesn't have a lot of creases. It's just easier to put that into the bezel and make it nice and smooth if there's not a lot of creases in the clay to start. So for this, that little point there, I can just start out by kind of flattening that a little bit and shaping it into kind of a point. So I flattened it out a little bit and shaped it into a point. Then it's easier for me just to place it inside of that point area and then start to tap down around it. Do you see how I did that? So I actually injured my thumb recently. I was making croutons and sliced my finger, so it's a little bit of an owie there. So I placed it into that point area, pressed it down, and now I'm doing the same thing I did in that oval, but this time I'm just pushing it up into the bezel with my thumb as I flatten the clay out. And then as I get to this point area, I can press it up that way, press it up that way, until I get that point area nice and filled. Make sure you stop every now and then and make sure that you have all of that clay off your fingertips, because that's also easy to get on that side, the outside edges of the bezel. Then you're just cleaning up your fingerprints versus the clay. Alright, so once you have it inside of the bezel and you're checking that, you know, there's not any gaps along these edges and making sure that it's nice and flush and flat, if you have a heck of a time getting inside of these areas, you can take a toothpick and also guide it up inside of there and then go in and press it flat. Or in this area, you can take this toothpick and go up and press it up inside of there and then go flat with your fingertip. Then taking a wet wipe, you make this nice and smooth, the clay itself nice and smooth by using the wet wipe and the moisture. You can also just get a little bit of water on your finger and roll it on there if you wanted to. And then I'm going along that side edge and cleaning up this side edge. We are now ready to move forward with applying the Gilding Flakes onto the wet crystal clay and learning about how to make these fun little balls. So let's get started. So I had a little bit of leftover crystal clay from when I filled my other bezels. So I want to show you how you can make this fun little round ball that you place inside of these open back bezels, and then we're going to apply the crystal clay onto the Gilding Flakes onto that. So I already have my crystal clay, and I'm going to just take a moment and clean these bezels really quick so that I have a nice clean surface to attach that to. Next, I'm going to take my crystal clay, and again, this is one of those things that you're just going to have to get used to with time, is figuring out exactly how much clay do you apply into this surface. So I had this much left over, and I'm just going to guesstimate that I'm just going to split this ball in half and see what it looks like. Let me just see if I have two equal sized balls, because if I was doing a pair of earrings, I'd want my balls to be similar in size. So you can see that they're pretty close. This one's actually a little bit bigger, so I can either just pinch that off and put it over onto this one, or pinch it off and put both of them aside. But luckily our ears are on opposite sides of our head, so it doesn't have to be super exact, but pretty close would be good. I actually just picked off one and put it on the other, so I'm just going to take that off altogether. So I have two equal sized balls, or pretty close. Alright, so working with the first one, I have a nice smooth, I'm going to make a nice smooth ball by just rolling that around into the palm of my hand. And I'm just removing any of the creases from where I pinched it off until I have a nice smooth surface to work with. And then taking one of my findings, I'm going to actually make it a little bit elongated, like a little oval like that, so that I can easily press it inside of the ball. If I get to that point and I can't go any farther without squishing it one way or the other, I can pull it back out and just make it a little bit longer and skinnier, and then try again. And you should be able to place it in there so there's equal sides of equal portions of the clay. Do you see what I mean? So like this. I'm going to put this down real quick because I just want to take a moment and clean any of that crystal clay off of the surface of my palms or my fingers. So I'm going to want to have a clean area for the clay to roll around. Next we're going to do is we're going to take it, and I'm just wanting to put more clay, if I had it on my hands or my fingers, onto this metal. So I placed that in there like such, and now what I'm going to do is just roll it around in the palm of my hand. And it makes it become nice and smooth, and I can sculpt it back into a nice round shape. So you can see it's pretty even on both sides. And then if I'm going to put this down onto the surface, it more than likely will dent or stick to a surface like this. So what you'll want to do is grab a little cup like such and a little toothpick, and you can just thread it onto there and then let it dry that way. So we have the second one here, and here is our bezel, so we're going to do the same thing on the other side. And if it was really quite a bit smaller, which this looks actually a lot smaller, you can actually take this out. And remember, I had that extra little bit. I can blend those two together again and get a nice ball. I don't think I need all of it, I just need part of it. Again, as you start to get into production on this, you'll be able to weigh this and it'll be much faster. You won't have any of this guesswork of not enough or too much. No, all your balls will be exactly the same. Place it in. So what this is doing is it's helping it press out so that it attaches onto this outside edge, and it's also giving us a nice shape. I'm pressing very, very gently. I'm not pressing down very hard at all. All right, and so I have my 2 round balls. You can sculpt them into the shape, making sure that they're just right. And use your wet wipe. You can come in and just wipe away to see if you have any excess clay. You can wipe that away on the sides. And then you place it on here. I'm going to take this one off again and wipe away. Just make sure that there's not any clay on that edge. All right, so now we have our 2 balls. Don't want them to touch. Place them inside here. And now we're ready to add a little bit of Gilding Flakes onto our wet crystal clay. So I'm using the Nuvo Gilding Flakes. This package lasts for a really long time, so go ahead and open it up slightly, slowly, and you can see that the gilding flakes are all inside of there. Then using a toothpick, I actually like to get this edge moist because it's easy for me to pick up the flakes. I just stuck that in my mouth. And you can see that it's super easy to pick up that gilding flakes onto the toothpick. And then this is just a random fun thing, is you just lay the gilding flakes right onto the crystal clay. And this clay is still slightly moist, and you just press it down into the clay like such. You can use a Q-tip and just burnish it down into the clay. And you can get fancy with your design. Obviously I didn't, I just placed it down inside of there. And you just burnish it down onto the clay. And then on the side edges, when you get to that, you can just, you can see I'm just rubbing it, and it just rubs off of the surface where that crystal clay isn't, because there's nothing really sticky for it to stay onto. If you don't want it in an area, you can just rub it off of that area. So that gives you an idea of how you apply the gilding flakes onto the surface of the wet crystal clay. Now let me show you how you do the same process with these little guys. I had a little bit of gilding flakes that came off onto this. I got the end of that toothpick a little bit wet with moisture from my mouth, and then you just place it down onto, that's actually not something I can pick up, so let me grab a little bit more of the Gilding Flakes. Depending on how much you want to place onto your surface. And you can actually do both sides. So I have the Gilding Flakes, I already had a tiny bit on there, you can just attach it. And you can just keep on applying more onto the surface. And then with your finger or with that Q-tip, you just burnish it down onto the surface of your crystal clay. So double check that you didn't compromise the shape. You can roll it around again really gently in the palm of your hand. Doing two things, I'm burnishing that Gilding Flakes down inside of there, and also just making sure that I have that nice shape. So you can do both sides, you can do one side, and then to let this cure, put it back onto its little toothpick, and that's what you do. So once these pieces are fully cured, you can assemble them into a necklace, and those round pieces I assembled into a nice little fun pair of earrings.